Everybody, how you doing today? Thank you for joining me with 55 weeks of prayer, of transformational prayer. And I'm just making sure that while I wait for everybody to come aboard to join me today, I'm going to share my broadcast of prayer. Oopsie. And I'm going to post. And thank you for joining me this morning. So, to recap a little bit, I just want to talk about what the 55 weeks of transformational prayer that I started back some 14 weeks ago was about. And it's about looking at my life and transforming things through prayer, through that divine guidance, that relationship that I'm building, a place of, the first week I talked about trust. The second was how I use my intention to transform things in my life, how I learn to practice the grace of patience, pause, detachment, of wisdom, to have the divine grace of courage through my life, and what it is to have humility, knowing that I am a human being, a spiritual being, all in one, and having the humility to perhaps find my way through that humility of knowing that connecting with my divine self, my spiritual self, my spirit source, that I have better guidance and the humility to understand that my choices truly do matter and truly do matter. Everything that I choose to believe, to say, to do, actually is the fuel of transformation. And with that, I had to, learn, and am still learning, how to release my judgments, my excuses, challenge my doubts. And last week was talking about desolation and how everyone comes to those points in their lives when they hit that type of desolation. And what do I do with that? And how do I approach it, believe and look at it? And how do I remove myself out and move to that consolation? And we did talk about that. We did mention that. And welcome, Connie. And I love having Connie's energy around me on the show, knowing that it brings me peace. But with that said, so moving from desolation, it isn't surprising to me that resiliency was the next word. And resiliency is the traction that gets me out of my desolation. It's that all of those principles that I just spoke with the weeks before prepared me to be, when I was in desolation, to know that there was another space of being. Good morning. Thanks for joining. So all of the weeks before in this transformational series guided me to, when I fell into desolation, to know that there was another space, another choice of being. And when I was there and moving throughout it and out of it into consolation, what was it that got me there? And so the new word for this week, became resiliency. So I do want to share in the beginning with you just a beautiful card that I pull from a deck I pull from. And it says, I no longer resist life. Transformation is about, I no longer resist life. I let myself be guided by the light, and I welcome what life offers. It does not matter what happens. I lift my thoughts up to God, and I am transformed. I seek the positive in each situation and welcome what life has to teach me. I go forward and trust in the universe. And for me, the universe obviously transforms to God. Cut my head off here, Sorry. And so that's my journey. This is part of what I'm learning. I hope that me sharing what I discover, the discovering the infinite grace piece of who I am, it is constantly what I do, and trying to discover and recognize and explore and experience the infinite possibilities of grace. It's been the cornerstone of my life, and now has, become the cornerstone of my work, right? And I'm always developing and always learning, and always trying to share what I've discovered. Good morning, Neshi. Thank you for joining me today. Neshi is head of the Star Nations organization that I am under the umbrella of, and it's a great group to belong to. Check out all their different shows and everything that they offer. The Star Nations magazine are all ways that spiritually support me as well. So it's a great group, and actually we'll talk about that that group of what we have, thrivers, right, that help us with resiliency. And I have a great group in my life, my friends, in my career, in my my family. I have a lot of survivors, thrivers, very resilient people to help me model the life I want to have through resiliency. So I'm going to try to stop saying ums. I notice I do that an awful lot. I got a lot going on in here, sort of like, in a race of thoughts, and the sort of like is a little stop sign for me to redirect. For the longest time, I recognized that my, there I go, son had ADHD. And as I learned about it, I never realized, oh my gosh, he got that from me. I'm living that. It wasn't several years. I won't call out which one. He knows, if he's listening, which one he is. And so I realized, attention deficit. And I was thinking about that this morning. And it's really not a deficit of attention. It's that we have full awareness and attention to a lot of stuff that's going on in the universe and the data that we get. And so it's very more of attention abundance, because we're paying attention to everything. And it's about learning, how do I ground all that, and that amazing information that comes in, that we're blessed to have the brain or the wiring for that. So I don't really look at it as a deficit anymore. I do look at it as it's something that challenges me to be able to express myself and those things to others that I do discover through having that ability to have all that information in at one time. For me, that's how I learn. That's how I process, seeing all the different parts to make the whole, as opposed to sometimes seeing the whole and then breaking them down in parts. I see a lot of things in parts, and then it creates the whole for me. So I want to talk about first the brain operating system. And we know that, when we hit an area of challenge we tend to always go with the survival mode of, getting out of that danger, getting out of that part that happens to us. So we have that very rudimentary brain that does that. So I want to look at our brain as having this operating system, but that my mind has become the app system. So what I think about, what I feel about, what I direct my intentions towards, those are all apps. And so today we're kind of just as we went into the other apps of trust and intention and patience and pause, detachment, wisdom, courage, all of those apps that we've been working on the past 14 weeks are apps that we can punch in and out of when we need them the most. And so when we strengthen those apps through understanding our own self, through self-awareness, and bring that spiritual piece of calling in the divine source that we're so connected to, but always connected to, but to call my awareness, right? I'll call my awareness and my focus and my attention to that particular app. And so with that said, I want to sort of let's talk about what resiliency is, right? And, these are going to come up kind of small on the screen, especially if you're watching this from a phone, like you can barely see it. I put it in there as a point of reference, to remind as you review the video, but you can go to my website, my Facebook page, Discovering Infinite Grace, like the page, go in under the photos. Each album is, pictures for that show are put in that week. So you can kind of look at them. Maybe you want to screenshot them. Maybe you want to paste them on your forehead, your mirror, wherever, in your car, wherever it is that, if it speaks to you, right? So just so you know that. But I just want to talk about resiliency. And resiliency is a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress in our life, which, raise your hand, I don't think there's going to be anybody out there raising their hand that's not had to deal with any of these, right? And the stressors of such as family relationships and our workplace and our finances. So what it means is it's about bouncing back from difficult experiences, the things that we perceive as extremely difficult. I mean, for some people looking on, they might have to have a big stretch their imagination of perhaps what someone's suffering. But everyone suffers. We don't escape it. We suffer in different degrees, and we have different skills of resiliency and understanding who we are and what's available to us through spirit. We forget that sometimes. So lots of times when we're in that mode of surviving something, our rudimentary brain takes over and we are self-reliant. We're like, whoa, we got to, run. We got to do this. We got to do that. That is the rudimentary brain, the physical body's brain, right? But when we add our spiritual brain and our spiritual senses, and we have to call upon them with our will and our choice and our intention, then we open up this whole another space of being beyond the suffering, beyond the stressors. And that's what resiliency is. It doesn't mean you're going to, once you survive it, you still are living with the aftermath of that, right? And what that means. And so we survive a moment of change, but what does it mean to thrive within that? And I believe that for me, it's about resiliency. It's about how resilient we can, become. Even, after an event stops us in our tracks, don't be afraid, be alive. And obviously in a moment of grief or stunnedness, whatever that is, that automatic change, that phone call you might get, that, situation in a relationship that instantly changes, or maybe perhaps changes over a time and you become to realization that it needs to change, and then instantly you make a change. Don't be afraid, be alive, continue on, don't fear it, respect what's happening to you, but don't fear it, because you're not alone. Even when you're in desolation, we know we're not alone. That is our mind, right? And we have to really get that traction to get out of that, to get into consolation or find some peace in our situation. And I believe that's through the grace of resiliency. And everything that we experience, so everything that we do, we feel, we believe, we think, contributes to who we are and who we're becoming. And resiliency is thriving. And it's a state of grace that is beyond surviving. And let's see. So then we come down to this one. And life is about how we handle Plan B, the plot twist. How do we create a plot twist in Plan B? In the circumstance, with the gravity and the brevity of what we might be dealing with. We go through things all day long becoming resilient. The things that we do that are simple things like losing our keys or, missing an appointment, the stressors, right? The regular stressors. And we all know how to tuck and roll with that. And that's a form of resiliency. It's, obviously a lower energy expense of resiliency, right? And then we have this greater things that we want to become resilient with. And we really need the grace of God because we need to be connected to that life force energy in order to move through the energy of survival and how to transform it to something that becomes resiliency, that we can live with the conditions of the changes that were made in an instant sometimes. And how do we move from that? Because we are still alive. And, I want to be clear, the way I'm using surviving is not the way that I see survivors that society talks about, great survivors that survive cancer and survive all these amazing things, the Boston Marathon, things like that. And you hear these incredible stories, and they are survivors, but I see them equally as extremely resilient and that they're thriving. So they go even beyond surviving. So I'm looking at surviving in a totally different way. So please understand that, because survivors in that sense, certainly mean that they're resilient as well. But I'm looking at the thing where we have a situation and we survive it, but are we living to the fullest life and our fullest potential within it, right? And so yes, like we survived the incident. We survived, my son survived a car crash. But after that car crash, and as grateful as I was, it was a lot of work to become resilient in our family, as a mom, helping with the recovery of that, and helping my son, guide my son to navigate to a place of resiliency. I mean, it was his senior year of high school, and it happened 2 days before he entered into that. He, had college offers and dreams to be a lacrosse goalie, to go away to school. He just had, finished all his braces and, has all his teeth knocked out. He suffered a mild traumatic brain injury in this front lobal part of his brain that, he had to work back from. He suffered from depression due to the accident, and not only physiologically what happened to him, but what happened to him just by, oh my gosh, in a minute, I was going to be a senior. I was going to have this great accomplishment in my life. And I don't even know how I'm going to function. I don't even know, with everything that was going on. And we were rehabbing him. We were in the middle of a move, building a new home, and we had to live in a hotel for a while because the projected time that we sold our home and, contracted to leave our home to the time that we thought our builder would have our house prepared was a great big lapse. So we spent the entire time from October to January in a hotel with a dog in a 2-bedroom hotel room, and we rehabbed there, and it was a challenge. So we survived a lot, but I wanted more for my family. My son wanted more for himself. My husband wanted more for his son. And so we went into, surviving, but we also wanted to welcome in resiliency and thrive. We wanted to thrive no matter what adversity was, there. So with that, you gain, you gain strength and courage and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I've lived through the horror, and now anything that comes my way, I'm ready for, right? And that was Eleanor Roosevelt. I would have loved to, I'm going to start actually, when I go to look for quotes to share kind of pictures to express what I'm actually going to start reading about Eleanor Roosevelt. She sounds like she was an incredible woman. She wasn't in my era. I remember my grandparents speaking of her, but never really as a kid like we normally do. We're not interested in that. I'm interested in, Petticoat Junction and the Flying Nun. And, I really didn't want to hear about Eleanor Roosevelt as a kid. Part of the reason I have really went above and beyond my comfort zone to actually talk on shows like this and get my face out on Facebook is to leave a time capsule for my children and my grandchildren. Because a lot of times where they are and where I was when I was their age, I was moving much too fast to really listen. And so to have something, like this, to have those conversations back with those that, we call our elders, with that wisdom, I wish I could have that time back. I wish I stopped and listened, but I didn't have the wisdom as a child. I just wanted to play and have fun. But I really love her quotes. And yes, Nessie says she loves her quotes too. Yeah, I'm happy I found that, Nesh. So with that, and we're going to show a little, this one here. And this is, I hope you can see it, is a course from Darwin, right? It is not the strongest of species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones that are most resilient and responsive to change. Now, that was a scientist. So resiliency is not something that I believe comes from anything that we can find in science, right? I think that comes from the heart. I think that is what comes from our spirit. It's what we draw upon. And so when we want to become resilient, we need to go to the manufacturer of that, and that is the source, God, that higher intelligence where our soul spark came from, where we're most connected to. And when we can do that, I truly believe that, we then become resilient and we thrive. So it's kind of nice that, we can distinguish that, right? And surviving is, like I said, it's we survive first, and that's, if we're living in life and we are just surviving, not the survivor, not what I'm talking about. This is a contrast of, not the survivor who's the cancer survivor, the Boston bombing survivor, the children in the shootings. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about once we hit that place of change, just surviving it, living, right? Living, breathing, the organism of our body. We're not thriving in it when we're not actively activating our spirit. Surviving, just the human body surviving, will look like we'll always choose the path of least resistance, right? it may not, the path of least resistance may not always be the best way to become resilient. We may have to challenge. The path of least resistance for me when I'm rehabbing my son would have been just to give up and say, oh, shit happens and wow, this is horrible. And, well, dude, you're just going to have to live with that. It's that wanting more, because what was ahead was a huge amount of resistance, getting him into the doctors and what he needed to have, and moving through the health system. We all know what that's like. And God bless me with, I had a job, prior to that I knew how to work through the system. I worked in a pediatrics department for many years. I understood the insurance system and referral system and who you had to go to. And then I also, those many years had passed since working there, had to actually call on my friends that I made there, and the resources that I had, to help me navigate and to continue to navigate. And it was an everyday thing. And a lot of people, I'm not telling you anything you already don't know, what that's like to access those types of things. So with that, it took me to really choose. Yeah, this was going to be hard, and I was going to have to keep diligent and take my task at hand. And hold that space. And that took an enormous amount of energy that I personally in my human body could not hold. But when I brought the spiritual in, I was thriving and I was undefeatable. And what I mean by that is because I just kept my eye on God. And I, asked, align my eyes, my heart, my mind, my words, my actions, my beliefs from my moment to moment. And that's what I did. So I stopped being reactive to everything and I got in proactive mode. I didn't so much react to the fear of what was happening to my son, his ability to move. There were surgeries, there was physical therapy, there was occupational therapy, there was working with the schools. I had to, work fast, and, my life's focus changed. And unfortunately, when we did that, I'm sorry, the dog is ringing the bell to go out. She rings the bell when she has to go out. I'm hoping she's just going to wait a minute. So with that, I'm going to have to get up and let her out. Hold on, guys. I'll be right back. It takes 2 seconds. Oh, how funny. I'm so sorry. She's out. I let her out before, but apparently she needs a little more time. And yeah, Jocelyn, it's like testing my my resiliency and focus, right? Yeah, she rings the bell to go out, and we actually have a latch on this door, and she knows how to open latches, so she will open the door to let herself back in when she's done. And then you just have to make sure you close the door, especially in the winter. But yeah, no worries. When you gotta go, you gotta go. Yep, did she? Yep, she did. And I have nobody here to let her out. So you move from a more reactive state towards things to a proactive. And reactive to me is being in that fear state of what you're looking at, the paramount of everything, that the brevity of everything, the happiness of your son, the mourning of, what, you're not going to have your senior year because we can only get bits and pieces of this because, it was a significant recovery. And I'm just using my story, and I know you can, just drop in your story anywhere in there. because my story is no different than anybody else's out there that has struggled, right? Noticing the theme of transformation in these prayers, so I'm noticing that how I've gone down these weeks getting these words and, contemplation and meditation and saying, God, show me what, where in my life, draw me to information, about this so I can have greater understanding. I recognize that every one of these weeks has been about, and the theme is about not being reactive, but being proactive. And I think it's proactive state of mind that we come from is through divine reliance. That's that, humility to know I have a lot of power in my choices. I have a lot of power to create my reality through my choices. And being in the human conditioning and being subjected to fear and to judgments and to resistance in life through the human conditioning and all the others. We then recognize that in the human conditioning, we need divine guidance to balance that out for us, to see the clarity on in which direction to go. To maybe we get into the blame of others, of the circumstances, there was no time for blame. There was no time for any of that. That energy we needed to take and put it forth other places, or find excuses, because I'm fearful. What is the purpose of all that? And there was a greater purpose. I mean, there was life-changing things that transformed in our family, in my son, and myself, and my husband. Our whole life, changed. So that life happens, right? Shit happens. And that really comes under the law of relativity. So those universal laws that are out there that sort of explain God as not this very, personal, right? God is impersonal in this experience of life down here because we have choice, and everybody's choice. Every time I make a choice or have an action, a belief, a word, or whatever, it has a ripple effect out there, right? And then in every soul here, every living thing has a choice, and how the choices are made then sets up experiences, all kinds of experiences that we can experience globally, in our communities, personally, in our relationships, and what's happening in the micro of our own world, and then the macro when we look out and we see choice after choice after choice. So the law of relativity states the purpose is it's a series of tests and a purpose for strengthening the light within us. And for me, I think you have to stay heart-centered when these things happen, because when things happen, we freeze. We close down our heart, right? And so I think the first thing for resiliency when we go through that is, God, open my heart again, because I'm broken, I'm hurt, I'm scared, I'm confused. All of those things that we fall into, desolation. And I doubt that you're there. Like, how can this horrible thing happen to me? So it's to ask for guidance and to remember that, a lot of times, when I was a kid, learning about God, we learned that, or I always thought we think that it's this force or this person with a white beard pointing down saying, okay, today we're going to test you with this. No, that's not what that law really means. The law means that we have this life, we experience this life, and it's an opportunity when things come upon our lives, to be able to see the strength of our light. And I like this one specific picture because I like the lotus and the light coming up, and the lotus is, very symbolic to our crown chakra, but also our heart opening, opening all of our chakras, right? All of our senses, our spiritual senses, as well as our physical senses, and asking them to unite, like Wonder Twin powers unite. If you remember that little comic where the two twins put the rings together. Well, to me, resiliency is about uniting not only my physical body, because I need that to move in this physical world, to make things happen, through my words, through my actions, through my just physical doing, and then to ignite my spiritual piece, my human spirit. Man never has made any material as resilient as our human spirit. And that's true. The strength of who we are is the spirit which we contain, the one we nurture, the one we access, the one we intend to listen to for guidance, and to be our command center, right? And so we have to recognize that God is impersonal in that. But when we are going through things, when we're transforming, when we are going through a place of survival that the human body does in that moment, then we move into thriving, and that is our human spirit. And that is a very personal relationship. That's when it turns and becomes a very personal relationship, and God becomes personal and invested in that. And that's, that's life. I mean, that's what we have to understand. God doesn't stand up there and say, today, Margaret, I'm going to rock your world, and not in a good way. That's not what happens. Life happens to us, and our destiny moves through us. How we handle it, how we grab hold of it, how we recognize it. And so just so we know that. And so we see life is an experiences. Our life is a set of choices, right? And I think this one's a really nice one. I liked a lot of his he started out as a psychologist and really not as self-aware as he thought he was as a psychologist. And then he had, spiritual movement. And so he, towards the end years of his life, he imparted a lot of wisdom from, I believe, going to a place of, being in the mind and then connecting the mind, but the spiritual mind as well, to overcome the mind, the physical mind, right? And the greatest, thing that I think he imparted on me is to overcome the physical mind, the fears, the thoughts, the judgments, the human conditioned mind. It was incorporating the spiritual mind, right? Our spiritual consciousness. So if we change the way we look at things, the things you look at will change. And that was Wayne Dwyer. And he's now since passed, but he's left on, a legacy of kind of understanding of where he was and where he was, going. I like that. So our choices dictates how we move through destiny. Destiny doesn't happen to us, but rather destiny happens through us. And that I say a lot because that's the teachings of the Akashic Records when I studied with Linda Howe. And I hold that on as one of my cornerstone things to throw a template over when I'm when my coordinates or my mind or I've been, I realize I'm not in balance or congruent with my mind, body, and spirit. When there's no congruency with the three systems there, I always stop and pause now and look where the signals are coming from, where the incongruency is within me. So it's our personal relationship with God's conscious, that our soul essence, the seed of our soul, that's what we thrive for. And to thrive is not just to survive. Survival is kind of that rote fight or flight response thing, right? So to have like prayer and dialogue, using my intention, I think I spoke about that, and align. So who knows me intimately, right? To I'm kind of freezing, aren't I? Who knows me intimately and knows my story here, knows what my soul's purpose to express and to experience. So asking moves us from a state of self-reliance to divine reliance. And self-reliance, we have that's just using our free will and our choices. But divine reliance is that whole thing, that part of humility of saying, you know, I really need much more than that. And if we remember in humility our choices, we actually hold and wield, you know, the power that we have to make choices in for our highest good, because we're calling in Source, who wants the highest good for us through our experiences, through our grief, through our surviving and thriving and resiliency. And recognizing this, that we willingly engage God's will to be aligned with God and Source and that consciousness. And that's through prayer, or however, meditation, just believing, just using your spiritual senses to guide you, to trust in that, to have that be your intention, so you can become resilient, and that we don't just survive and walk around in the victim of our circumstances, right? That pain, that grief, that loss, that meaningless way of feeling after something's happened to us, right? And so resiliency is knowing that I am only responsible Resiliency is knowing that you are the only one that has the power and responsibility to pick yourself up. You know, we can support people and try to pick them up, and that's a beautiful thing. And it does buoy them. But it's us that has to save ourselves, right? That has to change our perspectives, our will, our choices to where we want to be and where we want to find ourselves from this circumstance, right? So like I said, in the morning, I like adding my board meeting with my spiritual team. I did that every day when I woke up in a hotel. I did that pretty much when I laid my head down, when I knew that, we were so focused on that. And we also, at that same time, were not focused on the builder that we had. And unfortunately, the inexperience of the builder needed our attention. And at some time, I felt that our vulnerability for the longest time. Let me just make sure I'm still hooked up here to the 5G. We seem to have some freezing there. So for the longest time, I was angry and I felt taken advantage of in a vulnerable time that I couldn't babysit or totally check on my home. That I had to let go of that and focus on getting through what I had to get through. And if I stayed in that anger and that feeling of betrayal, it took a lot of my energy away and my focus on where I had to be, where I was moving towards, the goal I was at. So I did a lot of praying and spiritual teaming. And I also use my senses, but my sixth sense most, which I call my sense of humor. I think that's an extremely important part of resiliency, to have that sense of humor to get you through those really hard times and the craziness that we went through. And that's what kept me going. That's what kept my spirit alive. So not that the situation was anything to laugh at. That's not what I'm talking about. Is when I started to work through surviving and thriving, my sense of humor was one of my greatest tools, and brought me close to Creator, and, was appreciative that I was inspired to have a sense of humor about things, because at that point in time, it relieved a lot of tension because I was laughing. So I was laughing and I was having a physiological change in my body. I was relieving tension, and I was actually, the laughing, as we know, re-energizes us, brings that life force in, brings that, sense of a break in the high focus, or the things that we're taking, when we get too serious. And so it helped me with balancing. And life is a balance between what we can control and what we cannot. And resiliency is about, defining and developing our discernment and self-awareness enough to balance our life, to be comfortable and confident between effort and surrender. And that's to, use effort when there are in things that we can control, and to learn what it's like to surrender, so we're not using our energy to resist those things we can't control, right? Because to have the art of surrender, to know the difference between the two. And I think that's part of the serenity prayer, right? And so that's what we want to remember, we're developing also. Resiliency is about developing your discernment to a point where you can be comfortable and confident to know, hey, this is not something I can control. This piece I can't control. This piece that, my son's teeth are all gone in the front of it, I can't control that. I can get mad about that. I can get upset about that. But to accept and surrender to that. And once I surrender to those feelings, then comes, okay, but this is what we can do. We can find the best dentist. We can find the best plan. We can find the best someone to help. And you know what? Once you do that, you open a field of grace that you then come in contact with people that are there, that help you. And it's getting past that point of my thought process, so that I can open my heart, open my mind, open my senses, and I'm not all shut down and closed down in fear and anger and resentment and you name it. But to open it up like that lotus that we saw to the human spirit. And then all of these things come into my awareness, and I was able to keep moving to completion. My son, he's in college this year. He's living at home the first year or so to get the rest of the completion of his healing. To, going away was not going to be an easy thing, because he does have to have rest, but he holds a job. He goes full time to school. He's studying biotechnology. He no longer can play lacrosse, of course, because of the head injury. To get another one could be detrimental. And being a lacrosse goalie, he got plenty of knocks to the head and knocks to his body. But then he learned that he could still love lacrosse by teaching the youth. So there was a lot of transformation that went on. And I won't say that every time he's in a car that I don't think about that going out the door. But I have to remember how far I came and be grateful. And I manage that, right? I manage that through a prayer or telling him to, say a prayer to his angels. All those kinds of things, right, that we do. So I really like this one. as well. I gotta put this one down so we can really see, right? She stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her away, she adjusted her sails. Blow her way. She adjusted her sails. And that's Elizabeth Edwards. And I don't know if anybody of you remember, John Edwards was a presidential candidate, had a lot of things that went on. She suffered cancer, and she was a survivor. Then the cancer came back, and she lived with cancer for a while, and fought a valiant fight with dignity. She was the most resilient. She was a young mom. She survived a public scandal of adultery with her husband that was played out in the news for months and months, because of political parties' gain and whatever that, all that media stuff that we have in our society. And to me, she was one of the most resilient, dignified, graceful people I know. And she was extremely prayerful, very faith-based. And wow, class act, right? And for me, she's one of the many that I recognize as being extremely resilient, extremely resilient behaviors, beliefs, that problem solving, putting things into perspective, and actually looking outside herself, around, her decisions, helping her family, helping her kids, putting all that kind of thing first. And also too, going inward to have the strength to do so. So the difference between giving up and surrendering means giving up is that you're no longer going to do your best, right? Surrender means that you will continue to do your best, but will no longer be expecting a specifically great outcome. And so you're just going to do your best, and you're going to give it all God to the rest, right? And you're going to, really rely on that trust and that divine reliance. Give yourself completely over to prayer from your heart, and you will be heard through the universe, because that's your intention. And there will be answers that will come, and you will have support. It'll arrive. I am first to admit, and I'm sure that there's plenty of you that are listening now, can put a thumbs up or whatever you want to say, hey, yeah, I know this. I've experienced this. It is truth. And, honor the degree of trauma or life-changing events that you've had, and what your ability is, and don't use social media or even people's other stories. They are the author of their story. I'm the author of mine. And if I look at someone else to model where I'm supposed to be at or how I'm supposed to be resilient, I can take and pick and choose what works for me. But I cannot use it as a way to judge or measure who I am, or that's all personal. So when we look at that's just something to remember, right? Because sometimes when people get over things such as grief or whatever, and in different manners and in light speed, right? Doesn't mean they're any better or that they're in God's favor any more or less, because it's all personal. And it goes back to the weaver, the weaver, we see the underside of the weaving of the tapestry of our experiences, how our soul goes through and feels. And so all I'm just saying is that remember that everyone has a plan. The divine has everybody's back. It's just different. It's all just different. So if we get into that measurement, that could be something that could stall our resiliency, right? So don't look for the encouraging stories to know that God worked in that way, that God had their hand in that resiliency, in that survival, thriving type of environment, and recognize that to give you hope to keep going, right? When you doubt, right? It's that little rib poke from good old Doubting Thomas taught me last week before. So choice defines us, and resiliency defines the perspective of the world in which how we see it, right? In the world. And so I always ask God, align my eyes with your eyes so I may lift my perspective above and beyond the circumstances that I'm feeling at this time. Show me beyond my survival. Teach me how to thrive. So show me beyond my human survival, which is a very human physical need, right? And teach me to thrive is a request and intention. It's a spiritual one. So thriving to me is very spiritual. Know yourself. Use your strengths and your weaknesses. Know your weaknesses. Accept and acknowledge so that you may be able to clearly define where you are, like what your navigation tools are, and what ones to be aware of that may, stop your rudder, right? Jam your GPS system, cut off your wireless connection to God. So know those things so that you can begin to define what you need to do to start living and thriving within your day. And maybe even in starting to see glimpses and hopes and gratitude or enjoy moments. Because even when we lose our loved ones, we also have other loved ones around us that are still living and breathing. And how do we get back to that? How do we find our new normal? How do we define that from anything that we, whether it's illness or tragedies like, the Boston bomber or a loss of a loved one? Those are huge. Those are huge. And how do I define those? How do I get back to that? Okay. So here's some kind of instant steps to get to resiliency, like when you hit that rock bottom and you need that traction to get out of desolation into consolation and get things moving, right? Obviously, when we're in that state, honor the state if you're in a state of grief or mourning and it's that sudden change, right? Don't I got to move on. That's not what I'm saying. You need to honor where you are and let those feelings move through you, and just keep praying for the grace to help you sustain those feelings, withstand the storm, right? And think about how you want to feel and move away from the fear or the grief or the judgments, resistance by letting go. Perhaps acceptance is what now is, and that's just accepting where I'm at. Where I'm at, accepting is actually the first movement towards resiliency. We can't change what we don't acknowledge and accept in us. And resiliency is about change. Transformation is about change. So don't be afraid and don't judge what you're feeling or where you're at. And don't allow anybody to say, hey, you should be over that by now. I still suffer from a lot of the after effects that happened to me 2 years ago. Life is getting pretty stable for me. It was a long haul. I underestimated the power in that because I was in such a state of resiliency that I didn't acknowledge that sometimes I wasn't feeling my feelings. I was holding my breath for a very long time, every day. And then when things started to get stable, then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm taking a breath. And so just to remember that breathing is part of resiliency as well. And be kind to yourself. Love yourself through it. Resiliency is not making things perfect. And it's a journey about discovering what's going on around you through that experience. It's about discovering the best of you. So I like that. And I'm running a little late and I'm really sorry. Sometimes Spirit just gives me an awful lot of information to come through. And I didn't get the word till yesterday. And then this flood of information kept coming down. And so I always constantly write everything on a 3x5 card. So anytime thoughts come through, because I'm in that channel, and I have to write it down or it leaves me. And sometimes expressing myself gets a little difficult because I want to express so much. So thank you for being so patient and spending this time with me. I do honor your time. And so I'm going to go to just this. Oop, not that one. Oopsie daisy. Going down. Here it is. It's this very long one. And you won't probably be able to see that on there. I am going to read it to you, but you can also go on Discovering Infinite Grace, like that page on Facebook, and that's there. So you can probably screenshot it and blow it up on your phone. You know, we're all pretty techie. But if you can't, let me know. I'll copy it and send it over to you. Email me at www. I haven't put this up for a long time. For Infinite Grace at Comcast. I hope I did all that right. .net or Infinite. You always have to make sure. Okay. There you go. And I'll send you a copy of it. Okay. If you like it, because I know it's kind of tiny, but it's a very important little post. Or you can just go over to Facebook and read it there. But anyway, there will be very painful moments in your life that will change your entire world in a matter of moments. These moments will change you forever. Let them make you kinder, stronger, smarter. But don't you go and become someone you're not. You can cry and scream if you have to. Then you straighten out that crown and keep on moving on. Keep on shining. And that will lead you to the prayer today. And here it goes. O Holy Spirit, hover over me. Help me, guide me, align my eyes with your eyes so I may enter into a field of grace, activating the power of resiliency in my field, so I may transform this space, this place that I'm surviving, so that I may move to thrive in that state of grace. My circumstances have changed so suddenly. My life, my reality is shaken and turned upside down. Help me, carry me until I can find my way, align and adjust to a new place of being, a new coordinates in my life. Show me my strengths so I may trust and rely upon them, and show me my weaknesses so I may accept, love, honor, or perhaps change them in order to survive, in order to not just survive, but thrive through these circumstances. Bring me to the altitude of grace, rising above where my mind, body, and spirit can focus on and shift these moments before me within the field of your grace. Step by step, moment by moment, I look to you, trusting with courage and humility by surrendering my will, so I may welcome and align with your will. Your divine absolute love not only wants me to survive, but to thrive through the divine grace of resiliency. Amen. Thanks, Nesh, for putting that in there. Thank you, everybody. I ran over. I know I said I was going to start these series 30 minutes, but you know what? These things are getting deep, and 30 minutes isn't cutting it for me. So thanks for staying with me. I hope that this hour that we spent together is helpful for you. I hope that my intention is the energy of how I send forth. Thank you, Jocelyn. That comes from spirit, and I'm glad you like it, and I'm hoping it's helpful for you. And if anybody wants a copy of that, send me an email. I'll be more than happy to send it out to you. And blessings to everybody. May you embrace the resiliency in your life, so that if you're just only out there surviving or come upon something that comes to you in the future, that you will remember that resiliency will help. The grace of that will help you enter into that field of grace and not only survive, but thrive. Blessings to all of you. See you next week. I don't know what the word will be, but I'm looking forward to it. Thank you again for everybody sharing.